Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Najla Farahanim binti Zamri, and today I will be presenting my study entitled Redefining ILHAD through Epistemological and Retrospective Analysis. Okay, for the introduction, atheism comes from Western philosophy and it stands against the main foundation of Islam, which is Tawheed. And recent study shows that atheism is growing globally, not only in the West but also in Asia. Meanwhile, in the Muslim world, when atheism appears, Islamic scholars use the term ilhad, and they call an atheist as mulhid. So this discussion is not something new because atheism and ilhad have been around for centuries and they still continue to exist until today. Basically, these two terms had different meanings and development, ilhad and atheism, but we often use them as the same thing. Because of this, the purpose of this study is to examine the meaning of ilhad and atheism from both Western and Islamic perspective in an epistemological and retrospective analysis. Okay, now let's move to the next point. So let's move to the next slide, which is atheism in a Western context. The word atheism comes from Greek, which means the belief that there is no God. However, the meaning is not always clear because it overlaps with other ideas like unbelief, skepticism, and agnosticism. And unbelief slowly developed into skepticism historically and later into what we call now as atheism. And some scholars even say that atheism not only goes against religion, but in some ways it also shares similarities with agnosticism. And in general, atheism rejects belief in a God and supernatural, but interestingly, there is some atheists who claim they are atheists still believe in things like ghosts and spirits. So on this slide, we can see that atheism is not just a simple rejection of God, but a wider spectrum of ideas connected to skepticism, agnosticism, and unbelief. Okay, the next point is, in social Western reality, atheism is difficult to apply comprehensively. And to understand this reality better, Western scholars have attempted to classify atheists into several categories as on the screen. And the main problem is that atheism doesn't have a clear and consistent definition. And this situation creates confusion and overlapping terms on defining the real meaning of atheism. Okay, so in a retrospective lens, atheism can be traced back from the classical era, and it started from the unbelief of the ritual state. But since religion was tied to the state, only open rejection was punished. And if there is any philosophers with different views of God, they were allowed to live as long as they didn't challenge the government. And later, in the early modern period, skepticism became more radical, and this leading to the rationalism and empiricism. And this rationalism and empiricism shaped the modern science today and slowly pushed the idea of God aside. And this eventually developed into what now we call new atheism or neo-atheism, which rose strongly in 2006 through Western scholars. Okay, now I will move to the discussion of ilhad in Islamic context. Ilhad comes from the word lahida, yalhidu ilhad, and it means inclination or deviation, so it carries a wider meaning. But in a religious context, there are some scholars who narrowed it down and refer mulhid to someone who is specifically reject all religion. But somehow, majority of Islamic scholars define mulhid as person who is inclined or deviates from the straight path. And in Quran, ilhad has three meaning at least. And Ubaidah Ahmed Majid has summarized this meaning into categories, which is deviation from the names of Allah and the verses of Allah. The second is challenging or doubting the truth conveyed by the Quran, and the third is the inclination to act contrary to the Sharia of Islam. So, the wider meaning of ilhad allows ilhad to be used in broader context, and it can be referred to any inclination or deviation from Islamic teaching. And this can be seen from the classical Muslim era, when the term mulhid was used to describe several categories, such as the Mu'tazilah, which the one who labeled due to their belief that Quran is makhluk, and the Zindiq, which is referred to Muslim who is influenced by Mani's teaching, Muslim Kalam scholars who is dominated with rational doubts and philosophical skepticism, and also scholars who is influenced by nationalist movement. And also the term in ilhad was used to describe ad-dahriyun or materialists. And now I would like to explain the ilhad in a modern era. And this modern era, ilhad or mulhid are mainly influenced by Western atheistic thought. However, study shows that Muslims today are not always rejecting the existence of God completely. Instead, many continue to believe in God and religion, but they choose to live without following the Islamic law or Sharia. Because of this, they are often described as mulhid, but not as kafir, since they still hold some belief in God while lacking their interest in practicing the full teaching of Islam. So, after understanding the both side, Muslims and Western epistemological and retrospective analysis, let's look at the core finding of the study, which is to redefining ilhad. In Islam, the term mulhid are not strictly defined, but the terms mu'min, Muslim and kafir are very clear. Instead, scholars over time describe ilhad depending on the context, and this shows that ilhad cannot be simply translated as atheism, even though there are some scholars link mulhid to the denial of God or rejection of religion. One of the reasons is it is impossible to reject the existence of God, since it is a human fitrah. So, in a Muslim society, ilhad must be redefined as detaching oneself from the bond of Allah and denying the innate human nature, which is fitrah. And the bond with Allah in this definition refers to divine regulation and laws, or Sharia laws. And fitrah denotes the innate human disposition that recognizes the need for God, who must be worshipped, and the natural orientation to live in accordance with human creation. So ilhad thus occupies a conceptual space between faith, iman and kufr, disbelief. This definition is more likely to suit the reality of modern Muslim ummah, and the attitude of ilhad is driven by four main human tendencies, which is stated in the Quran as a part of human nature. But these tendencies are separated from Islamic teaching and law. And in modern thought, these tendencies are often expressed as secularism, liberalism, materialism, and naturalism. And as for the conclusion, after examining atheism and ilhad in a Western and Islamic perspective, from its epistemological and retrospective, we can now summarize that ilhad and atheism is not the same. Ilhad has a wider meaning in Islamic context, and it reflects the tendencies of humans to live their life without law and just to follow their hawa. So, redefine ilhad as detaching oneself from the bond of Allah and denying their human nature is the best definition for ilhad. And understanding ilhad in this way help us approach the issue with clarity, especially in guiding the Muslim community and addressing challenges in modern society. That's all from me. Thank you.